Welcome everybody, and welcome to what is everybody fast thinks should be turning into the Irish themed office hours. This is because we have 5 sessions in March. We decided that we would do an extra mid-month special. Usually we only do an office hours special on the last day of the month, but we had the opportunity to do one, and I'm delighted about this session because we cooked it up at Dreamforce. So I'm very pleased to welcome a panel, and we're going to talk about this tool, Declarative Lookup Rollup Summaries. And I'm glad to see so many familiar names on the call, because this is obviously a tool that's very useful to a lot of you. So we're going to do a little bit of show and tell. We're going to talk about the tool a little bit, but as usual, office hours is for your questions. So please, if you have questions about Declarative Lookup Rollup Summaries, please put them in the chat to start with, and then we'll come to your question as we get to it. Because there are a lot of you on the call, please mute your mic unless you're actually speaking. If we need to, we'll ask you to unmute and get some more details, but otherwise try and keep your mic muted. And there are definitely some questions coming in. I see that there's one here about soft credits. We may not really touch on this today because we're talking specifically about this tool. Sorry, Diane, but I think some of this may help with you for that too. So what I'd like to start with, I think, is just is a little bit of introduction, because there may be some people on the call who don't know very much about this tool. So welcome, Andy. Welcome to Office Hours. We're all very grateful for the work that you did, and I wonder if you can tell me, I mean, why did you decide to build this tool? What did you...
Yeah, so kind of my inspiration behind it is basically Salesforce's fault, really. We see a lot of traction in creating solutions without code on Salesforce, particularly. Many other platforms have kind of declarative solutions without requiring code, but Salesforce, from my experience, has kind of got the niche for being able to empower people which aren't necessarily coders. And I really got the buzz for doing that, both within Financial Force and some of the tools we provide to our customers, but also here as well, because it's great to be able to be a developer and then extend the potential of what you have to others that aren't developers through declarative tools. So it's really motivating to see the people using the tools in ways which actually I never envisaged, and sometimes raise an eyebrow at, but think, yeah, okay, let's go for it. So I think it's the empowerment aspect of what declarative apps and tools bring to the community and the customer base is the most appealing aspect. And I did find a library in fact, if I share my screen, I can walk you through it very quick. I can share an article that I wrote. Let me just share this screen here. Where is it? There it is. So I can share the link to this afterwards, or put it in the chat window. But I wrote this back in May, and Salesforce asked me to speak about what were some of the motivations. And essentially, if you look at this sort of cog diagram I created, then it's kind of, you've got a declarative platform here, and you've got declarative apps, and both of those lead to a flexible solution. And I think ultimately, as we sometimes found in the chat room, in the chatter group, for the tool, you sometimes need to know when to stop and when to go into code, and that's true with this tool as well as the platform itself. But on the whole, it does offer quite a lot more flexibility for those that aren't particularly coders. So yeah, I wrote this article, I can share that. There's obviously lots of other resources that are available. We've got the main GitHub page. There's lots of documentation links on there. There's a link to the chatter group, which is this one. Some 400 odd people in that at the moment. Sometimes the one confusing aspect is how to install it. There is actually a package installation, so you can upgrade and install that very easily. You don't need to use development tools. But if you do want to be a developer, right down at the bottom here, is a link to actually push the code itself into your sandbox or development org. But I would only recommend that if you're planning on contributing code to it, or maybe taking a copy of it if you wanted to, for your own purposes. It is open source after all. But yes, the main route is through these package install links. You can see the history here. So each time I do a release, I put a link up in this README file, and you click on the right one for Sandbox. So yeah, is that good enough background?
Yeah, absolutely. That's great. And I know I think you're preaching to a converted audience already, but just briefly for anyone who's joining the call going, what on earth are they talking about? Could you just, for the lay person, just quickly explain what this does?
Let's
or
have
what
a quick
problem
look at
it solves? Yes.
So essentially, the Rollup tool is solving a problem where you need to summarize various values. Either you can do various operations: min, max, average, count, concatenate, first or last. So these things might be familiar if you're familiar with Lookup Summaries, which is a feature of the platform. And if you've got a master detail relationship, those work fine. But if you don't have a master detail relationship, you can't do any of this without code. So this tool fills that gap, really. If you've just got a regular lookup relationship, not master detail, then you can express the parent object and the child object and the field that connects the two, and ask it to aggregate a certain field into another field. And it's as simple as that, really. But one of the complicated things is that you have to set up a trigger. At the end of the day, this isn't doing anything magic underneath the covers of the platform. I don't have any secret keys to the platform, unfortunately. So it is deploying a small Apex trigger, but that operation is handled for you through this button, the Manage Child Trigger button, and it gives you a preview of the code. I think that's useful for people to see exactly what's going on, because we don't want to cast any doubt about what this tool's doing under the covers. This is exactly what it's going to push into your org. It's fairly small, the code, because a lot of it delegates to the package itself, but it does need a trigger to be deployed, and that's only if you're doing kind of real-time roll-ups. So if I'm editing opportunities and I'm expecting the value to roll up into my annual revenue, as I'm doing that, then a real-time trigger is needed. It does support different modes. There's a really good article about scheduled one of our contributors wrote, which is here on the README, and it'll talk you through all the different scheduled modes. Schedule mode is useful if you kind of want to do things which are formula-based, that are based on time. The tool really only operates on data that it can see, and if you've got a criteria in your roll-up that operates on today or month or year or period or things like that, then schedules are more appropriate. And there might be volume reasons why you might use schedules as well. But essentially, it's filling that gap between rolling up things that are not master detail.
Fantastic. And we have a comment from Bill, who's often on this session, saying, in short, it makes Salesforce do what you would expect any other database to do. That's maybe. Just quickly, Beth and Warren, I know that you use this tool with a lot of the organizations that you work with. Can you just give us some quick examples of the sorts of things that you use it for? I'm sure there are many.
I can screen share a simple one, and then I have my more complex one queued up for later, Caroline.
Yeah, absolutely. Or maybe just tell us what sort of thing you do with the tool.
I use it a lot for the thing Andy just left off on, which is date-bound roll-ups. If I want to know, total widgets last month, or total things that are active today or active in the next 30 days, or like things that are more dynamically date bound with dynamic date ranges, and then you throw those into an overnight batch, and you know that every day that number is going to be accurate.
That's fine. What else is coming? I'm just looking to see some of the comments that are coming in. So there's Lauren has put in about the fiscal year roll-ups, and it's amazing for that. I think, is that because Laurel, you're having both you're using this tool for fiscal year roll-ups, while the nonprofit success pack ones you have set for calendar year. Is that so that you can see both?
Actually, no, it's on the account level. I didn't figure out a way that it wasn't, well, it wasn't working for us because of the way we had to slice and dice the data, and the automatic roll-ups we got through the nonprofit starter pack just weren't working for us. And so I couldn't figure out any other way to do it date bound, and so using DLRS for this is really super great for us.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Somebody's asked, is anyone...
You can totally do that.
Julia's asking, is anyone using this to count how many campaigns someone responded to? That's an interesting
one. Of my favorite features is the concatenate unique. I really like using that to sum up in a more meaningful semantic way the detail records onto their parents. So if you have a contact who has participated in a lot of programs and all those participations are on detail records, but they may have repeated certain programs, but you just want to see the list of unique programs they've participated in, you can roll up those program names onto the contact into like a nice list of here are all the unique programs.
Ooh, that's clever. That's clever.
I use that.
Yeah, could you? Perhaps we'll get you to show that one and line it up.
Sure.
I've used it for things like most recent. The most recent, particularly with something like subscriptions, which is which is maybe out on a custom record, and looking at the date that somebody most recently purchased a subscription. I think that's first and last. Thank you, Andy. You're doing great. Bill has an example. I found this useful to concatenate opportunities split with allocations. Because you're going a level down from just opportunities, Bill? Bill? Oh, sorry. He's probably talking to his button.
While he's
Go on.
Getting off mute, I can also point out, since Andy has that drop down showing, oh wait, no, go back. You also notice that you have access to average directly, which with standard rollups you don't. You have to use 3 fields to get an average, because you have to do the sum, and then you have to do the count, and then you have to do a formula field on those 2. So having direct access to average is really handy.
Okay, Bill is saying that he's using it because he sees the text names of the allocation on the opportunity record. Stuart is saying he uses it to summarize application reviewer scores for grant applications we receive.
Nice.
Oh, that's an interesting one.
I've also had it happen where on some more complex projects, our architecture gets so complex that we reach the end of our master detail chain limit and we have to go to lookups, or for some other compelling reason, we have some key relationships configured as lookups instead of master detail. So, in a scenario where all else being equal, if it were a master detail, the standard rollups would work, suddenly they don't. So we now have this other option.
I'm just showing on the screen when I get asked fairly regularly about hierarchies, whether it's on different objects or account. I quite often reference this article because it talks about hierarchy in terms of accounts, but it's equally applicable to other types of self-referencing objects as well. So I just got to that link from the main doc link.
Fantastic. And I see we did have one or two questions about documentation, and thank you, Dan, for leaping in and saying that you're working to to clean up some of this.
Is Dan on the call? Dan, you're awesome. I don't think we've ever spoken, but Dan is absolutely awesome in terms of responding to questions. Basically, I couldn't keep coding this thing if Dan wasn't answering all the questions. I couldn't do both at this stage. So thank you, Dan.
Well, thank you, Dan, and I'm glad that you're here.
And everyone else that's answering questions as well. I don't want to isolate anybody. It's thank you for everybody answering questions.
So let's see. We have quite a lot of comments of people who are saying they're just here because they're fans, Andy, and they wanted to say thank you. I did think that we got a question somewhere. Oh, yes, from Bruce. Perry, I think while we have you here, I'm going right back up to the top. Asked a question about triggers. If I already have triggers in place for an object, do I need to do anything special to get DLRS, as some people call it, working with that object?
Yeah, you have to set the calculation mode to developer, and that means that you have to take on the role of calling the engine yourself from your own trigger. So there's a global API. If you go to the package and look at the classes in the Rollup service class, there's some methods. We could do with more documentation, but if you have any problems, just ping the chatter group or the GitHub site. But yes, set it to developer. Describe it as you would normally, but by setting it to developer, you don't need to deploy the trigger. You can activate it without deploying a trigger, and it will work as normal, but you have to call the API at the right moment in time to actually do the roll-up whenever you want to in your code. So yes, you don't have to proliferate triggers if you have some already.
Let's keep going. To anyone who's hoping for a few more demos and things, we only have Andy on the call until past. So I think let's do some of the more technical questions that are coming in specifically for him. Hang on, those of you to whom this is all gibberish, because we will, when then Beth and Warren are going to pick it up, and Beth, I know, has a great demo for us that will help you to understand a little bit more about the tool. You've got 2 demos lined up, Beth. There you go. Okay, so back to Ryan. I think, Ryan, you had a question for actually directly for Andy. The 50,000 SOCL limit is something we've faced elsewhere. Any chance to get around this moving forward, maybe with batching?
If I had the solution to that, I'd probably be working for Salesforce, changing their governor limits. But yes, you can move to schedule mode and schedule things. And then in the custom settings, you can calibrate how much data each chunk takes up. So basically, when it runs to when it goes in batch mode or schedule mode, it starts chunking things up in by default. I think it's 200, something like that. But if you want to change that, you can reduce that up and down by changing the calculate job size and the schedule job size. So the schedule one's the one that runs all the time, and the calculate one is the one that runs as you demand it to do so. But if you flex these, unfortunately they're not roll-up specific, so it's kind of lowest common denominator, then you can get around the limit to some degree because it will consume less roll-ups to calculate per burst of activity when executing the batch job. So Salesforce allows us, fortunately, to flex the work that goes on in each chunk of activity when processing in batch, and therefore these allow us to control that based on your particular needs. So that is actually covered in a bit more detail in one of these blogs, actually. I think it's probably this one, where it talks about the custom settings, dealing with the 50K aggregation query limit. It'll talk a bit more about it there.
Great, thank you very much. Yes, and Ryan is saying thank you very much as well. Michelle asked in the middle how open source was the code, and is it open for other developers to adopt and make updates?
Absolutely. I think Beth put the link to the open source repository in here. Here it is.
Yeah,
I've lost
I did.
It is. It's the license file is here. It's a BSD license, which is probably one of the most flexible ones. You have to retain it, but it just exonerate from any responsibility if the world comes to the end type thing. Well, you can read the legalese about it later, but that is the open source license. And yeah, there is actually a lot of enhancement requests. I think where we are at the moment is got quite a few things in discussion. How many bugs have we got at the moment? Not too many bugs open. And then where we got for enhancements, wait for it. Oh, yeah. Take the bugs out of that list. Yeah, so 56 open enhancement requests. So if anybody wants to get involved, please do.
So Michael asked, on your enhancement list, is there a way to find a median?
No, I don't know whether that is actually in there. No, I don't think there is. It could be. Some of these are quite old, so apologies if I've forgotten for anybody that's raised it. But yes, if you want to put that in, something there. Yeah, I don't see it, but yes, but please add that if you want to suggest that. Or I do tend to put this priority flag on. Yeah, it's a little bit sort of subjective on my behalf, basically, because if it's a quick fix and it's really causing people pain, I'll put a priority flag to remind myself when I get the next burst of activity. I'll basically focus on these ones. But if people want to sort of add more information about what is more important than others, then I'm happy to look at that. But it's a little bit, it's not much science behind the priority column, really. It's just based on what impacts it's having that I can tell at the time. But yes, there it is. That's the open source repository for it. As I say, do install it if you just want to be a consumer of it through the package. Don't deploy the code. A lot of people deploy the code and then deploy the package, and you end up with 2 of them in the org, and it's a real mess. So don't do that unless you want to actually develop on it or actually take a copy of it for your own purposes. You can do that, but otherwise just use these package install links because they'll upgrade and it'll be a lot easier. You can retain your rollups and stuff like that.
Could you just pause on that part of your where those links are just for a moment, because we did have you asked about how to install it. So we are, and I think actually the best starting point is probably your blog post, isn't it, Andy, where you sort of explain about it, and from there you can get the links to.
Yeah, there's a very early video. All my blog posts should point back to this README, because otherwise if I include install links in my blog post, they get out of date very quickly. So this is the center of truth in terms of the release history and the install links for the packages, always. But yes, there's a small video I created from the very early days, and then each of these I try and do in sort of chronological order of documentation we've created. As Don's saying, we're starting to branch out the wiki a little bit. So this is another interesting one that causes people some pain. If you've got some complex validations on your child objects, the triggers might fail to deploy. So it needs a little bit of code sometimes to help through that. But yes, the wiki's growing. So I would recommend that you just start with the documentation section, work your way through that, watch the videos, go to the wiki.
And we will come on to doing some demos, Julia, and this session is being recorded. So I mean, what's your kind of personal roadmap, Andy? What if you weren't being employed by Financial Force and you did have some more time? What would be the one thing you would do with this tool, do you think?
I think probably the most popular enhancement, probably most popular 2 usability enhancements are the ability to improve this section here, which is where you put the criteria in. This one here, relationship criteria, because you need to know a bit of SOCL to do that. And I think the chatter group, again, has got a really good strength of people that help people build these SOCL queries, but it is a barrier to entry. So some kind of UI around that would be useful, and also some drop downs, so you don't have to type the API names in and stuff, which we did actually have in an earlier UI for this, but when we switched to custom metadata, I didn't have enough time to carry that across. So I think probably those 2 from a usability point of view. The other thing I've been thinking about recently is a kind of tracing mechanism where if you've got a lot of rollups defined, having some way of sort of doing an operation in Salesforce and then looking at that log afterwards to see which rollups were fired and why and what kind of resources they used. You can do a lot of that with debug logs and stuff, but they're quite hard to actually parse your way through. So I would say those are the 3 things, the 2 usability enhancements to this screen and maybe some kind of tracing feature would be useful, all of which are in the large enhancement list.
Well, out in the nonprofit world, we're all about community. So all these people who are on the call here, this is what Andy would love it to have. I agree. The Sockle one has defeated me as well when I'm trying to use it. But there are some good resources about Sockle. So maybe actually what we should all try and do is a little community list of the sorts of things that nonprofits do quite regularly. And maybe we could build you a little library of things, because yeah, I've had a question down there. Do we know how many nonprofit orgs are using this tool? I mean, you probably can't split them up, but do you have an idea of how many organizations overall are using it, Andy?
Not non-profit ones, I don't, but overall, I'd have to get the figure. I think it was easily sort of creeping over 10,000 installs, but those probably include sandboxes as well.
Fantastic. Congratulations. It's brilliant. And Dan is saying, yes, please come to the chatter group if you have Sockle issues. And for that's a chatter group that is in the success community rather than the Power of Us hub.
It's this one,
yeah, absolutely. So
Kate
yes,
just posted a really great tip too, which is to use Workbench to help write the basic Sockle queries, because then you can test them and make sure they're pulling the records that you expect, or at least the number of records you expect, and then copy that where clause into your DLRS page.
So if we have time, Beth or Warren, could one of you explain a little bit more about that when we get further into the call, about how to do that? Okay. Do we have any more questions for Andy? And yeah, that's brilliant. How many of people are?
Yeah, I just wanted to make a shout out before I dropped off the call. There's obviously loads of people chatting in the chatter group, but these are some of the people that actually contributed code over time. So it's thank you if you're on the call or listening afterwards. Really, really appreciate it. Thank you a lot.
Great.
Okay, thanks everyone. I'm going to have to drop off now, but I really appreciate everybody's support behind the tool, and I'm really glad it's helping improve what you can achieve with Salesforce and make it a stronger platform.
So
Thank you, Andy.
Lots of thanks. If you don't mind, Andy, I'm going to dismiss you just to make sure that you don't end up shutting the meeting for everybody else. But thank you very much indeed for your time. We're very grateful that you could make it, and we will now carry on. So I think I'm going to pass things to you, Beth, and if you'd like to tell us a little bit more about ways to use it. So,
all right.
Okay.
Which window? That window.
That's great. Andy managed to get himself off without ruining
crashing the call.
crashing the call. So there we go. All right. So just to remind everybody, this session is being recorded, so you will see these demos, and we there are lots of links in the chat to how you find this tool. And now Beth is going to tell us a little bit more about a more specific nonprofit example.
Yeah, I've got a couple or a few queued up. And Warren, if you have stuff to show as well, let me know, and we can sort of go back and forth if you want. But I'd gotten a few ideas from some folks about common nonprofit requests for this kind of thing, and I've configured a few of them to show you. So the first one is just a really simple count of donations on a contact that meet some criteria. So this is stuff you can do with user-defined rollups sometimes, but I like to keep everything in the same tool, and since I'm using DLRS for everything else, I'll use it for that. So let's look at donations over $1,000, just really simple filter. This could just be count of total donations, but I'll show how to add a filter as well. So if I look at Jane's donations, she has donated once, and it was for $500. So our count of total donations over 1,000 is 0. But if I add a donation, she got really generous today, And I'm going to save that. And we expect, haha, donations over $1,000 is now 1. So let's go take a look at this is the DLRS record that is making that happen. So I'm calling it count of large donations on contact. A few best practices here that I can share. I always put in the name of my DLRS config what object it's going on and what object it's counting or rolling up. So in this case, maybe I should have put opportunities, but I know what that means. But you can see I've got on contact so that when I do the drop down, I can quickly understand what I'm looking at. So this is how you configure one. You just define your parent object and your child object. You define the field that connects them. In this case, it's the NPSP primary contact field, and that's the field on your child. And then you can define your relationship criteria over here. And actually, I should probably have a mount in here as well. You list the fields that are in, this is that where on the SOCL query. So I have where amount is greater than or equal to 1,000. And then you list out the fields again that are in that criteria. And then you've got some more configuration down here. You have to say, what is the field I want to aggregate? And in the case of just a simple count, you're just counting the IDs. So you just put ID, but I'll show you in another scenario where you might want a particular field. And then sometimes you have ordering that's important. In this case, it's not because I'm just counting. So my aggregate operation is count, and then you have to define the field where you're going to put that result. So this is the field on your parent object, so in this case contact. What field is it that I'm going to park this result in, this count of IDs? And in this case, I just made a simple field called donations over 1,000.
And sorry to interrupt. Yeah, and sorry to interrupt you, Beth, but there's a little chat conversation going on here with a suggestion that in the API name you might want to put prefix DLRS on that field so that you know that that's one that is rolling up.
I have a different convention for that.
You have a different convention. Go for it.
So yeah, let me finish here and then I will come to that. But that's actually a great idea. I'm going to think about that. When you first create your DLRS record, you will not have this active checked because you haven't deployed the trigger for that object yet. So when it's the first one you create on that child object, you won't be able to activate it right away. So you save it with the active checkbox unchecked, and then you just hit this Manage Child Trigger button. Hit one more button to deploy the trigger. It's all just clicks. You don't have, it shows you the code, but you don't have to understand it. And then you come back to this page, check that active box, and hit save, and you're good to go. And then you do have a force calculate button here. So when you create one, it's not going to automatically go back and populate that rollup field for all of your past data. But if you hit this calculate, it will do so. And you can watch those go in the Apex jobs page to see when it's done, because it can take a few minutes if you have a lot of data. So that's really high level, just how to set up a simple one. Yeah.
Can you just clarify and those triggers they're not per summary, are they? They're per object?
They're per child object.
Yes. So, for example, having done this count of the opportunities, if you then went back and did a slightly different one that is still rolling up opportunities, you wouldn't need to. It would be the same trigger, wouldn't it?
Like this one, total gifts this week on campaign. Do you want to see another one? I literally have not hit save on this one yet because I was just setting it up as Andy was talking.
Okay.
So if you want to, we can do one more. I can hit active, and I've got close date equals this week. I should put close date here. This should work. This is another common one where from a campaign, I want a count of gifts that have come in this week. So this is where we were talking about the overnight batches to count relative date ranges. So in this case, our date range is this week, and what I can do is go up here to this Schedule Calculate button. And now I have this little interface to define what is that nightly run that I want to do. I can set the time. So right now it's set to go, by default it's 2 a.m., so hour 2, minute 0. And if I scroll down here, you can make it happen any time of day you want, but generally overnight is good. And then you can also set, it's defaulting to every month and no day of week and every day. But maybe you want something that just runs on the 1st of the month or the 15th of the month or whatever your business case may be. You have ultimate flexibility on this page to define when you want this roll-up to run. And then at that moment, it's going to look at that relative date range. So for something like this, I would just leave it at running every day. And then you hit schedule, and it's going to set up scheduled Apex to run that every night, or at whatever schedule you just defined on that interface. It will also run in real time as gifts come in. So throughout the day, any new gifts are going to update that. But then at night, it'll ditch the, well, I guess at the end of the week in this case, it'll recalculate for the new week. Make sense?
It does. What's the difference in that? There's the calculation mode real time, and then below it there's something called the calculation sharing mode. Could you just explain what those two fields mean?
Oh, calculation sharing mode has to do with security, like visibility. Warren, do you ever use that? I never pay attention to it.
No, I've never had to use it. That's what I understand of it too, is like if you wanted to pay particular attention to the sharing or the security structure based on the user that triggers it.
Yeah, Dan says, highly recommend setting it to system. It's record sharing.
Yeah.
Most of the orgs I work with have wide open sharing models, so that's why I've never really paid a whole lot of attention to it. But if you do have, sensitive record sharing models in your orgs, then put some thought into that field. Thank you, Dan.
And a question from Laurel. If the calculation mode is scheduled not real time, does that mean it will only roll up on the schedule? Oh, thank you, Warren. Do you want to say your reply out to everybody?
Yeah, it's just one of the fantastic things about DLRS is there's a lot of flexibility in how all of this fires, and a lot of my use cases have been in real time. So as soon as something happens, I want you to update the records. But like Beth was just demoing, sometimes you don't need that to happen. Sometimes you have to take into consideration what other load you've got going on in the system. So if maybe you've got some really complex code, you don't necessarily want it to run in real time, or you've got a managed package that that sometimes they can bump into each other and not work correctly. So scheduling allows you to not have to worry about your users getting thrown in Apex error and panicking and not knowing what to do.
Go ahead.
I think calculation mode scheduled is slightly different from the schedule calculate button. So Dan is saying here, calculation mode scheduled and scheduled calculate are totally different. There's a link there. Scheduled calculate does it on the schedule that you defined in that UI I just showed you, and calculation mode scheduled, which is this one down here, just puts it in an entry to roll up asynchronously, so it's not gonna hold up your record save. It'll fire shortly thereafter. Versus real time, it's firing the trigger on your record save, so it can make the record save take longer, right? If you have a lot of roll-ups on that.
I am so glad that I misunderstood that, and because that is something that I felt like it was a strange thing that was missing from this, but you guys have just solved some problems for me. So thanks for clarifying that.
Yeah.
I was just going to say, I think the thing that the time where I've found problems with it is if you've got records that are, if you've got a separate system that is pushing something like payment transactions into Salesforce, because often whatever the payment processor is doing, it may be doing quite a lot of complex processing. Click and pledge, for example, or what have you. So it may be, if you're trying to count up payments, it may be a good idea to not have those fire immediately.
Dan would like to chime in to clarify how calc when scheduled works. Please, Dan.
So if you set the calculation mode to scheduled, if you scroll down on your page right now.
Yes, hang on.
Oh, maybe it doesn't show it here. Well, there's another object called Lookup Rollup Summaries scheduled items, and what will happen is in scheduled mode you'll get records being created there that basically tells DLRS something happened on this parent object. We need to recalculate based upon this lookup, but they will only fire when you schedule an Apex class to run called Rollup job. So you have complete control over when those scheduled items will be processed, and not only complete control over when they'll be processed, the batch size. So someone was speaking earlier about how if they have 50,000 child records, they're running into some SOQL issues. You can set the batch size to be a smaller amount, so that way it will take longer to process, but you can get around some of the limitations of the platform.
Thank you, Dan.
That's great, and I think you'll see that other object. I mean, you're still in editing this one, aren't you?
But people who are starting to get a little overwhelmed at all this techiness, you don't need to understand all of that. 90%, of the use cases that I've ever run into are just real-time roll-ups that are because you have to roll up a formula field, or because you have to do context to accounts roll-ups, or you have to just roll up across a lookup that otherwise would work with a standard roll-up, right? You don't have to understand that stuff. Okay. It's not showing me that, but it's because I'm in the metadata pilot, I think.
Yeah, all right. You wanted to tell us about lookup lookdowns, and then Julia had asked, is there a link on how to trigger the rollups? Yeah, and Dan says yes.
Taking care of it.
Good. Okay. So yes, do look up that. And then Warren, I think on a previous office hours, you ended up actually having to show somebody how to change the schedule or to find the schedule to see if, would you mind, after Beth's done her thing, maybe showing us that again, how you find a scheduled rollup? Great, thank you. Beth, take it away.
All right. So I realized I just blew up the data that was in there because that one didn't have a campaign. Okay, so I have another example here. If you notice in my compact layout up here, I have last donation campaign. So what was the last campaign that this contact donated to? And the one that I just entered, the $1,500 record, didn't have a campaign, so that is now blank. But if I delete that one, let's see if that'll populate. Of course Lightning is being wonky. So this is a concept. I have to give props to Christian Carter, who I think had to leave, unfortunately. But Christian came up with this pattern called the look down lookup. And this is something that people have been asking for years, which is basically the ability to roll up into a lookup field. And DLRS lets you do this. It is incredibly magical. What you do is you're looking at your detail records, and it's a use case where only one of your detail records is really relevant to you at any given time. So we use this a lot for current X, right? Current enrollment, current program registration. But then when you get into fundraising, it's most recent donation and interesting things about that most recent donation. So in this case, we're going to do last donation campaign. So I have it. Where did it go? Yeah, here we go. This is the configuration. So this is parent object is contact, child object is opportunity. I'm, again, using that NPSP primary contact field as the definition of the link between those two. And then I'm aggregating the campaign ID off of, oh, thank you, Caroline. She's just posted Christian's blog post about this pattern. I'm aggregating the campaign ID into a field called last donation campaign. But the cool thing is that last donation campaign itself is a campaign lookup. Okay, so I'm rolling up an ID into a lookup field. And what that does is it gives me a proper lookup field to the campaign on my contact. Then the magic happens where I can create other formula fields on the contact to expose information from that campaign on here. So in the case of like a current enrollment or a current registration, you can expose more data from that child, from that particular child record on the parent at any given time. And as soon as a more recent or more relevant child record comes through, all those fields on the parent are going to update because they're just formulas. It's super smart. Props to Christian. Go read the blog post and implement them for everything because they're awesome.
You seem to be blowing a lot of minds right here.
Awesome.
But there is a question.
Diane, you could also do that. So the question is, could I make this field include all campaigns that this contact participated in? Yes, I did mention that. So in that case, I'm not going to change the field. Where did that one go? Last donation campaign. Okay. In that case, you would be rolling up the name, the campaign name, and you would use concatenate, concatenate distinct. And campaigns off opties might get a bit funky. You might have to actually use a different child record like campaign members, but the idea stands. But you would be rolling up the name and using a concatenate distinct. And then you've got, just to point out, you've got your concatenate delimiter down here. So is that a comma and a space or a slash I've used, depending on the use case. Oh, and just very quickly before I pass to Warren, let me show you how I distinguish what gets populated by DLRS. I do not use an API name prefix, although I really like that idea. What I do, last donation campaign, there's my field. And yes, I'm in setup and classic, I'm sorry. I put in the help text populated by DLRS, and I make it read-only. So, of course, help text doesn't populate in compact layout, but if I come down here, I can see here that this is populated by DLRS. And it's showing as edit because I'm an admin. That's all. It would be read-only for my users.
Just very quickly, Laurel had mentioned that if she were going to do this, she would filter the campaigns so that it was a membership opportunity record type. That, I think, becomes part of the relationship criteria. Could you just explain about that, Beth?
So you can add whatever relationship criteria you want here. It's just like the filters at the bottom of a normal roll-up summary, except you can use formula fields, you can use relative date ranges, you can do whatever you want. It's way more flexible because it's just a SOQL query, literally. It's taking this string and plopping it into a SOQL query. So you have a lot more power, but it is that same concept as the filters at the bottom of a normal roll-up summary definition.
Yeah, the record type, of course, is a little tricky. Yes, thank you, Warren.
Sometimes to get around that jumping, if people are following the chat, I just use formula fields on the child object to reach further.
Yeah.
Sometimes you just need to set up a couple hidden helper fields to make it work, but it totally still works. Warren, do you want to show some screenshots?
Sure.
Okay.
Let's see.
Let's change you over. Where are you, Warren? There you go.
I think I can do it because I'm presenter
It's
right
all right.
now. There
And go.
So a couple of the use cases I was trying to think through for like development teams, directors specifically, they want to see what was the last piece of communication that happened with the donor. And so one of the scenarios I threw together was I want to see, there's in Salesforce there's a really nice last activity date field that'll work on any object where it'll pull the most recent activity. So I've got that one built right here. But sometimes you want to see like what the content of that conversation was, and so you can actually use DLRS to roll that up as well. And so on my record here, hold on, I need to hide my window.
And sorry, Warren, there's a couple of requests. If you could zoom in a little bit, please, so the font's a bit larger. Thank you.
Cool. Mm-hmm. So you've had a conversation with a donor. Maybe you want to like log a call. Made it too big. You can use DLRS to bring in the most recent activity and the content of those comments. So if you're logging things this way, and you can do this for other objects as well. So I'm going to say I'm interested in making a large gift. So from the contact record, DLRS, I didn't set that. I need to change some of this criteria. What it did was it pulled another one of my activities I created today. But what you can do is you can pull the text of the most recent up onto the contact record. And I think that a lot of development teams would find something like that helpful. You need to tweak the DLRS setup a little bit more than I did. Another scenario, I was asked to think through some like date situations, and so the Nonprofit Success Pack is fantastic. It has a lot of like really great user tools for you, but sometimes it's not enough. Sometimes last N days from NPSP is not enough. If you want to set 180 days, so you can use this to calculate any other date setup that you're looking for. So I've got, I want to see the, on my contact record, I want to see any closed opportunities that were closed within the last 60 days. So this is the relationship criteria I've got set up. And so what happens is if I were to run and create a new opportunity, sorry, this is a little too big for me. I can set this back. I don't know what 60 days from now would be, but you can use the date criteria within DLRS will help you filter out kind of like Beth's example with campaign engagement, like whether you want to see campaigns that they've been most recently a part of. You can do the same thing with donations. And did it? So it rolled up, so I now have 3 opportunities. I've got 3 donation records, and if I were to set the dates outside of that 60 days, it would remove that from the calculation.
Just to go back just a very quick thing, Warren, why did you use is one is true rather than a stage in your criteria?
It's more generic, really. I mean, some people. You may have different departments that use different stages to represent something that is closed and won. So this is just one of those other kind of hidden fields that you can use.
It's much easier to write the the SOCL as well, isn't it?
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yep. It is, and is closed is another one. Although that would bring in both closed and lost. But yeah, no, there's a lot of nice ways to set up the queries, and I think that's one of the best things about Dolores is that there's so much flexibility. The other, in like the interest of time, within Workbench, you can log in, and I think I'd never actually thought about this, but this is a fantastic suggestion. But you can use workbench.developerforce.com and actually kind of test the same criteria, because it can be a little tricky to throw together a SOCL in just a text field and expect it to work. So you can use it to say, all right, I want to find these opportunities where the amount is greater than $900, and so this everything that follows after the where is essentially what you can bring over into this relationship criteria. Oops. Into this relationship criteria, and you can. The nice thing about Workbench is you can add multiple criteria, and I want the close date to be last. So this is kind of the use case for bringing Workbench into this. Is yep, it's a game changer, and I had not heard about it until this call.
And then,
thought about
Goran, can you just hit query?
Mm-hmm.
And we'll just show how it does actually show you the records, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you can sort of cross-check. Yeah, I would expect that to return about X,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, or you could even do, set it up as like I want to count any opportunity that is the Workbench will just calculate that for you. You got 32 records that are above that amount that have closed in the last 30 days, or later in the last 30 days.
Yeah, that's fantastic.
Yeah,
and then you can also add parentheses to nest some of these and start doing ORs and things, which Workbench doesn't do from those filters. It's just doing straight all ands, but you can, here in the relationship criteria, SOCL in general does support having advanced filter criteria.
Yeah, and we didn't spend a lot of time like fleshing out a real scenario of this, but I think one of the other fantastic things about Dolores is like the ability to evoke things with Process Builder. So in the event that you've got kind of a really unique scenario, you can set up, Process Builder to filter what gets rolled up with the relationship, the criteria here, and then configure Process Builder to make it happen when you want it to happen. So if you've got, if you're looking at Process Builder and you've got multiple nodes in that and you only want this calculation to happen at a certain node, well, you can use this calculation mode to trigger the roll-up at that point. It's a great tool.
Okay, so just very quickly, if anyone has scheduled is using the scheduled, not the scheduled calculate, but actually scheduling their roll-up summary, where would they go to see if it's running?
Yeah, so if you're in Lightning and you click on the app launcher, you can look at all the available objects that are here, and there's a couple different places where that's where you can find them. If you push like a one-time calculation, like you just want to do it right now, you can find that in the calculate jobs object. And then what's the other one? It's at I think it's this one, the scheduled items. I don't have any currently scheduled, I don't think. Let me schedule one real quick.
And there's also a place to go to see the ones that you scheduled for the overnight batches, which is under setup.
And scheduled jobs, is that right?
Yeah.
Yep. Okay. Fantastic. Great. We are at. We're coming up to time. I love the comment from Diane. Thank you. I was hoping to learn more about soft credits, but this was way better. Great. I'm very glad.
Yeah, there you go. Use Dolores for soft credits.
You can use Dolores for soft credits. It's one of the few things. Yes, it's one of the good ways to roll up some stuff to do with soft credits. And yet there seems to be a whole load of debate going on here about apparently, yes, we can all talk about Dolores and not DLRS. the people in the know. So you're now, because you've been on this session, you will all start calling it Dolores, and everyone will know that you were on the session. So I have been recording it, and I will make the recording available. If I remember in a minute, I will save the chat log as well, because there are some great resources in that. Fantastic. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Beth and Warren, for being put on the spot and for those great demos. Thank you, everybody who's participated.
Thank you, Dan,
and asked
too.
questions. Thank you very much, Dan, for sharing a lot of really useful information. You are an honorary member now of the Power of Us Hub and nonprofit community, and we love you. And thank you very much, everyone. We're back to a general office hours session next week, but it's been great spending some time with you. Have a very good St. Patrick's Day and a great weekend.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Caroline. Thanks, Warren. Bye.
Hey, Beth.